Hello everyone, my name is Tamsin Regnes and I'm a certified type coach professional and a certified Myers-Briggs practitioner. I'm delighted that I've been asked to record this webinar for you today, and I hope what you'll come away with is some light bulb moments about some of the differences in personality types and how that can impact in a positive way if you understand a little bit more about those when you're working with others. So the title of my talk is Appreciating Differences in Personality Type to Help You in Your Business. Now, my background is over 25 years in the NHS, and I worked in many teams during that time. But it wasn't until I discovered my personality type that I suddenly realised that many of the challenges and the frustrations that I'd sometimes had when working with other people were not them deliberately trying to wind me up. It was actually they were doing things in a way that felt right for them, and that actually my way wasn't always the right way for everyone. And having that appreciation of those differences has really made a big difference to me in my working life since then. So now I help people to discover what it is that makes them tick, and also, even more importantly, as far as I'm concerned, is to actually appreciate that others may talk. So what I'd like to do is spend some time taking you through just three of the pairs of preferences that we look at when we're helping people to discover their personality type and appreciate those differences. So the first thing I'd quite like you to do is to grab a piece of paper and a pen and just scribble down your signature for me with your preferred writing hand. And then once you've done that, I'd like you to transfer the pen to your non-preferred hand and to write that signature again. And as you're doing that, think about how it feels, how much energy it's taking up. Are you having to concentrate harder? What does it look like? Because actually what I've asked you to do there is to demonstrate the principle of preference, and that's the concept on which the tools that I use is based. So we all have a preferred inbuilt hand that we write with. It doesn't mean to say we can't write with our other hand. In fact, we sometimes do. If you break your hand or your arm, you're going to have to learn to write with the other hand, and it will feel terribly draining initially, but the more you do it, the more comfortable it feels. And actually, you may get to a point where your writing with your non-preferred hand may actually be better than someone who normally writes with that hand. But actually, when the cast comes off or when you're able to use your preferred writing hand, you will go back to that. That's your default. And that's what I mean by preference. So it doesn't mean that we can't work in other ways. It's just one of them will feel more natural to us and more energizing. And when we think about personality types, the other thing to take away is that there's no better or worse personality type to be. With what I use, there are 16 different types, but every one of those has something to bring to the table. So they're different, but it doesn't mean to say they're worse. And so I like to think of it as looking through your lens. What's your personality type in the lens that you look at the world? But actually it can be very different to the way in which someone else is looking at the world and doing things. So what I'm going to do now is take you through three of the areas that we examine when we're helping people to look at differences in personality types. The first one is all about how we recharge, where we get our energy from and what increases our energy levels when they're low. And this is the only one I'm going to introduce some terms that are used in this. The rest of them I'll be talking more generally, but I'm going to introduce the terms extrovert and introvert because in our normal language, extroverts and introverts are terms that are used, but they're not the way in which we use them in terms of the personality types. So I thought I'd explain those for you first. So as with the other thing to explain is actually it's not about whether you're shy or socially capable. In my personality language, this is more about your energy. So you can have shy extroverts and outgoing introverts. So actually what I'm talking about is what is it you need to do if your energy levels are low to bring them back up again? What energizes you? So for extroverts, as the picture may show, they like to be around other people. They'll often be out talking with others, debating, and they want to be with other people because that's what increases their energy levels. However, on the other side, introverts actually need time alone to recharge, time to have some quiet internal reflection, time to read a book, just so that actually that is what they need to recharge and be able to operate at full energy levels. Now, one example of how this can play out is, certainly in our household, is when we're playing things like board games. Because if you roll a dice and everyone has to answer a question when you land on a particular square of a game, there'll be some people that will talk their thoughts through. And these are the extroverts. So as you can see in the diagram, the extrovert is saying, now let me think, I know I've heard of this before. Where was it? I wish I could remember. And on the other side, you may have an introvert that's thinking that through in their head, but actually not being able to particularly well because the other person is talking. Actually, they both may come to the same conclusion and provide the right answer, but the way in which they do that is different. Extroverts often tend to need to talk to get, it's almost like greasing the wheels to get their brains working and to them to get to the best answer. And you may have, in your working life, come across clients or people who you work with and colleagues who may come in and say to you, can I chat something through with you? And you may say absolutely nothing at all, but because they've talked it through, they've actually come to the answer themselves. And that's an example of where perhaps an extrovert who perhaps sitting alone on their own can't really work through the question as well. But once they talk it through with someone, the other person may not need to say anything at all, but they can manage to solve it. Whereas for introverts, time alone is what they need to process and to come up with an answer. So what I thought I'd do is pitch this around, let's say, for example, you have a new client that you're working with. What sort of things can you look out for that will help you to get a feel for whether someone is, for example, an extrovert or an introvert? Now, this is not foolproof, but it's just a guide, and it can just help you with your interactions and communications with someone else if you have a feel for this. So this next slide it's part of a bigger infographic, which you're welcome to download from my website. But it's giving you a feel for, if someone's like this, be aware of this. And what you might want to do is this. So, for example, with one side, if you're working with someone who is quite expressive, I'm an extrovert, my hands go around a bit, so I have to be aware of that. I can be a bit bouncy. I am quite talkative. I do get energized by being around other people. Now, if you're working with someone and you're picking up some of those clues, things to be aware of are that they're probably more likely to want to talk something through face to face or on the telephone. That's going to energize them, and they'll probably do their best thinking like that. You're probably going to actually see what's going on in their heads because they'll talk it out, and be aware that what they're saying may not be their final answer because it's part of their thought processes. And they can be a little bit more full on, debating, enjoying that, which isn't everyone's cup of tea. And the other thing that extroverts can do is that they can interrupt people when they're speaking. And it's not that they are trying to be rude, it's just that they're interested, they want to show they're engaged, and they want to chip in to help with that discussion. Now, on the other side of the coin, there may be people who are perhaps less expressive, they are perhaps quieter, they need time alone to recharge. And if that's the case, you need to be aware that they may prefer to communicate via email rather than face-to-face or on the telephone. They're likely to think through their thoughts and come to a conclusion before they offer their answer. And they're less likely to do their best thinking if you put them on the spot. So when we look at, okay, so what can we do now knowing this? If you're working with someone who is quite talkative, quite quick, wants to chat things through, and they put you on the spot, for example, if you're not that sort of person, then it's absolutely fine to say, oh, I need some time to think about that. Or even to just give an indication that you might need to think. Let me think gives you a little bit more time. Because if we're not careful as an extrovert, if I ask a question and I don't get an answer quite quickly, I can make the assumption that you haven't really understood the question. So I might rephrase it. And then I'm interrupting the thought processes of an introvert. So if you're working on the other side with an introvert and you're not, then what you may want to be aware of is it's actually to not put someone on the spot, for example, in a meeting or you're having a discussion. You might want to ask them about it in advance. Give the agenda out a couple of days before if you're in a meeting, so that they've had time to process things and come up with an answer, which they might not do if they're put on the spot in a meeting. So that's extroverts and introverts, and hopefully some of those things sort of resonated with you and may have been helpful tips to take forward. So moving on to the next area I wanted to look at, that area is all around how we make decisions. And people make decisions in very different ways. And this can affect a number of things in our lives. So for example, how we use email. So I'm going to show a short video, which I want you to have a look at, which tries to demonstrate a point. Now the full video itself is on my website if you'd like to have a look, along with lots of other helpful hints and tips. But this is just a small part from it. So Fiona typed an email with pleasantries in it, explaining exactly the situation. Tim is very busy, as you can see, bashing out lots of things. And he knows that Fiona would like an answer, so he replies quickly so that she's got that answer. My question to you is, how do you think that Fiona might feel when she gets this reply from Tim? And this is where email miscommunications can happen for a number of reasons. But here, Tim wasn't angry. He wasn't in any way upset. He just was very quickly replying to Fiona's email. So she had a response because he wanted to make sure she did. But his lack of pleasantries could be misunderstood. Now, one of the reasons why what this is linked to is around how we make our decisions. So some people will make their decisions based on logic and they're very objective, and others will make their decisions based on how it's going to impact other people. So you've got objective decision makers who take themselves out of the situation, sort of an arm's length decision. And you've got more subjective, people-focused decision makers who will try and put themselves in that situation to see how it might impact and how people might feel. Now, the main thing to stress here is just because someone makes their decisions in a logical, objective way doesn't mean to say they're not nice people. and they can't be feeling. It's just that in terms of this particular area, their decisions are very much more in this way, objective and logical. So people, you can probably guess from now that people who are the more logical, objective decision makers don't tend to feel the need to put pleasantries in their emails as much as those who are the more people-focused, subjective decision makers. Doesn't mean to say that they can't, but it doesn't come as naturally. So possibly if Tim had added, "Thanks for your email," that's fine. That could have made a difference into how it's interpreted. So it's just something to be aware of when you're working with someone. And if you don't know them, it's probably a good idea to put some pleasantries in as well, just to get a balance. Once you start working with someone, you can get a feel for how they like to send, start and finish their emails. So actually, I am on the more objective decision-making side, and I don't always feel the need to put pleasantries in. So I'll often write my email, then I'll go back and read it, and then decide what I need to add to make that a more rounded one if necessary, considering the recipient. Similarly, if you're on the other side and you tend to put pleasantries at the start and the beginning, you may decide after a while that someone doesn't need as many as you may be putting in, or that a couple of words answer may be sufficient. Now, I'm not saying you should change who you are. We are who we are, but we can flex our approach to communicating via email. Adding a few pleasantries is useful, makes an email possibly appear a bit less harsh if it could be misinterpreted. But similarly, if it's the third or fourth email you're writing to someone that day, you probably don't need to have all the pleasantries about "I hope you're well," etc. in there. So it's about a balance. Don't change, just flex if you think it's going to help the situation. So let's just summarize again using another part of the infographic about how people make their decisions. So if you're looking for clues, people may be direct, quite logical, but they're more objective and task focused. Now, if you're working with someone like this, then things to be aware of is that actually they are going to look at any issues from a very logical perspective. They can sometimes appear to be a little blunt or assertive in the way in which they express themselves. And actually, if you're trying to put an idea forward, then having both the pros and the cons is really important to them. Now, one thing to be aware of is actually they don't find people who get overly emotional. They find that quite uncomfortable. So try not to do that if possible. And actually don't go overboard on pleasantries in your emails there, which we talked about. Now, on the other side, you may work with people and the clues they're giving you is that from their actions, as they're empathetic, they're values driven. That's really important to them. Maybe more subjective, and they're much more people focused. So if that's the case, be aware that they really like to build personal connections with you. They're attuned to the emotions of others, and they will consider the impact of any decision on other people first. That's really important to them. So actually, if you are less like that, it's really important to invest in the relationship with those people to get the best from them as well, because they'll want to, then they'll feel comfortable and happy to work closely with you or go out of their way to help. And then just be careful that you're possibly what could be one-word emails are not misinterpreted. So that's the second area, how we make our decisions, which affects lots of things in our lives. But emails is probably one of the things that's quite important at the moment to be aware of. And the last area I wanted to go through with you is about how we approach our deadlines, our relationship and approach to time, plans, and structure. Now, this one, again, if you're working with other people, especially if it's a new person, if you can get a feel for how they work and how they meet those deadlines and their relationship with time, it can really help, because this one can cause a few challenges and frustrations if you're working with someone who is, especially if they're completely the opposite to you. So my question here is, think about packing a suitcase. You're going on holiday, you're going in a week's time. Some of you might have already packed, of course, but let's say you're starting to think about packing, and it's a week before you go. At what point do you pack your suitcase? How do you pack your suitcase? Do you have a list? Do you tick off that list? Do you place it on a surface? Do you fold everything up and then do you put it in your bag and have your bag packed a day in advance, or certainly the night before if the taxi's coming in the morning, for example? Or actually, does that not work for you? And actually when you pack is right at the last minute or very close to the deadline, because actually you do your best packing at that time because you're really focused at that moment. So what we're saying here is, the way in which you approach your deadlines will be how you prefer to do it. Some people love the structure. They'll have plan charts. If we're talking about a project that you're working with someone on, you might have a planning chart, you'll have tick boxes, you will have, like to know where things are. And the tendency is, if you're not careful, to want to keep asking someone else you're working, where are you up to? Have you done it? But if you're working with someone who's the opposite to you, and actually they don't want to close down and make too many decisions too quickly, after all, there might be something else that's even better that comes along as a solution. So if you're working with someone like that, they tend to leave their finishing off of things to the last minute, because that way they've taken on board as much as they possibly can. But B, that's when they do their best work. But people like that need to be aware that actually, if they've not written anything down because it's all going on up here, people who are on the other side, who like that structure and like to know what's going on and where things are up to check that we're going to meet the deadline, that can be really uncomfortable for them. So for some of you, I'm sure this is resonating in terms of people you've worked with in the past. But again, for those you're, perhaps new to working with, something to certainly consider. And here's another thing you can look out for in terms of clues. And again, it's not 100% the answer, but people who have that more structured relationship with time tend to use words ending ed. Completed, I've finished, I've decided. People who have that more relaxed relationship with time, much more sort of go with the flow and leave things to much closer to the deadline, they're going to use words like finishing, completing, deciding, because they're still in the process of doing that. So watch out for those. And again, just to summarize then, if you're working with someone and this is the clues that you're picking up on, things to be aware of. So if you can see their planners, that they like closure, that they prefer to finish in advance of the deadline with some time to spare, then be aware that last minute changes don't sit particularly well with them. They can be quite intense when they're stressed and up against a deadline, because actually they like to finish early. They don't like being very close to a deadline when they're finishing something. And they will actually enjoy making plans and knowing where they're going, and will get energy from doing that. They will enjoy that. But be aware, actually, if things change, you do need to let these people know as soon as possible, because changes at the last minute are really not great. And so actually they would like to have time to be able to do whatever they need to do to get themselves back in the right place in terms of, okay, I know where we're going now, we've changed, but I know where we are. On the other side, if you're working with people that appear to be more spontaneous and they like to keep their options open, they've often got a lot more relaxed sort of way about reaching their deadlines, because they do their best work, then that's what energizes them. Then if that's the case, then be aware, they are happy to go with the flow a lot more. Changes at the last minute don't tend to phase them so much. They're a lot more casual with their relationship with time. And actually they can find, if they have plans imposed on them, they can find that quite restricting. And again, you know, what to consider is, if you are a structured planner, let's say, you know, how do you ask them how they're getting on? Have you done this yet? Is probably not the best phrases to use, but how are you getting on with is a slightly, you know, is a better way, so that you don't appear to be micromanaging them. You know, follow up in a more relaxed way. Okay, so I've summarized that, but this, I thought I'd finish with this slide for this particular preference, because I think this is such fun, and it's probably resonating with some of you already, either if you've been to the airport with someone, or you know, you've had to get to a conference or something with a work colleague, and they've got a very different approach to you. So Julia and Peter had learned years before that the best thing for their marriage was to meet at the airport. So one of them, who was very structured, got to the airport with lots of time to spare, felt really comfortable. That's what worked for them. Whereas Peter's still putting on, thinking he can get another wash on and still get to the airport. The main thing being that they do both get on the flight, but actually they get on the flight, both of them, happy, energized and relaxed, rather than one of them being either very flustered because it's close to the deadline, or feeling as if they're being micromanaged and made to sort of go earlier than they wanted to go. So what I've talked through with this webinar are 3 areas that of our personality that we can pick up clues to. We can get a feel for someone, how someone we're working with prefers to do things. May not always be completely right, but it will give you some help in terms of how to communicate, to approach them, to work with them, to interact with them. So we've looked at where people get their energy from. We've looked at how people make their decisions, and also how people meet their deadlines. Now, I'm hoping that you've had some light bulb moments along the way, or if you've already knew it, it's refreshed that information in your mind. I'm always happy to talk about these sorts of things. So if you ever want to get in contact with me, do feel free. Now, if you'd like to tap into my website and download the lens infographic, which has got another area on there as well, please feel free, it's there. If you'd like to sign up to my occasional musings, which are certainly no more than once a month, and just tend to have helpful hints and tips about differences in personality and how we can navigate some of the challenges and frustrations that they may cause when we don't quite understand it, or to help you appreciate those things, please do sign up to that. You can do that via my website. And if you want to connect with me in LinkedIn, please also do so. So it's been a pleasure to provide this webinar to you today. I hope you found it useful, and have a good rest of your day.